Have you ever heard of a Roman emperor who was completely dominated by his mother? Not just influenced, but literally told what to do, day in and day out, even in front of his battle-hardened legions. Meet Severus Alexander, the man whose reign was less about his own power and more about the iron will of his mother, Julia Mamaea. His story isn't just a quirky footnote in history, it's a dramatic saga of manipulation, resentment, and ultimately, a brutal end that plunged the entire Roman Empire into half a century of chaos. This is the story of the emperor who was never truly allowed to rule, and how his death became the first domino to fall in one of Rome's darkest periods, the crisis of the 3rd century. So, how did a 14-year-old boy end up on the most powerful throne in the world? To understand that, we need to rewind just a little. The Severan dynasty was a wild ride. It was founded by the formidable Septimius Severus, but after him, things got messy. His son, Caracalla, was a brutal tyrant. He was then assassinated and replaced by Macrinus, who was quickly overthrown by a flamboyant and controversial priest-emperor named Elagabalus. Elagabalus was actually Severus Alexander's cousin. His reign was so scandalous, so filled with bizarre religious rituals and personal excesses, that even the Romans, who had seen it all, were completely fed up. This is where Alexander's mother, Julia Mamaea, and his grandmother, Julia Maesa, saw their chance. They were brilliant, ruthless political operators. They presented the young, mild-mannered Alexander as the complete opposite of the chaotic Elagabalus. He was marketed as a traditional, respectable Roman boy. The plan worked perfectly. The Praetorian Guard, the elite soldiers who made and unmade emperors in Rome, turned on Elagabalus, murdering him and his mother in the palace. And just like that, at the age of 14, Severus Alexander was proclaimed emperor. But everyone knew who was really in charge. Julia Mamaea, his mother, didn't just step into the background. She stepped onto the center stage. From day one, Mamaea's control was absolute. She wasn't just an advisor. She was the co-ruler in everything but name. She sat with him in official meetings. Her name appeared alongside his on public inscriptions, and she even held the unprecedented title of Mother of the Army and the Senate. Imagine being a senator or a general having to address your emperor, and his mom is sitting right there, scrutinizing your every word. It was a situation that bred deep resentment. The Roman elite were used to powerful imperial women, but Mamaea's overt dominance was seen as a profound insult to Roman tradition and to the emperor's own authority. Initially, things went relatively well on the home front. With Mamaea and a council of experienced senators guiding the state, the administration was stable. They reversed many of Elagabalus's controversial policies, taxes were managed responsibly, and the legal system was respected. Alexander himself was, by all accounts, a decent person. He was studious, respectful, and genuinely wanted to do the right thing. He wasn't a tyrant, he listened to advice and tried to be a fair ruler. But his good nature was also his weakness. He was passive and completely unable to stand up to his mother. One of the most telling and, frankly, shocking examples of Mamaea's control was what happened to Alexander's wife. He married a noble Roman woman named Sallustia Orbiana, and he genuinely seemed to love her. But Mamaea grew intensely jealous of her daughter-in-law's influence over her son. She couldn't stand the idea of another woman having his ear. So, what did she do? She ruthlessly turned on Orbiana. She accused the young empress's father of treason and had him executed. Then, she had Orbiana herself stripped of her titles and exiled to Africa. Alexander, the supposed master of the world, was heartbroken. He pleaded with his mother, but he was powerless. He had to watch as the woman he loved was sent away forever, all because his mother couldn't share her son's affection. This single act reveals everything about the power dynamic in the palace. While Alexander was being micromanaged in Rome, trouble was brewing on the frontiers. In the east, a new and aggressive power had risen, the Sasanian Persian Empire. They had overthrown the Parthians and were determined to reclaim all the lands once held by the ancient Persian kings, which included Roman provinces in the Middle East. This was a serious threat. In 231 AD, Alexander and his mother traveled east to lead the Roman army against the Sasanian king Ardashir I. This was Alexander's chance to finally prove himself as a commander, to step out of his mother's shadow and earn the respect of the soldiers. But it was a disaster. The campaign was poorly planned and indecisive. The Roman army suffered heavy losses, not just from battle but from disease and poor discipline. While they managed to halt the Sasanian advance, there was no glorious victory. The soldiers, who respected strength and battlefield success above all else, were not impressed. They saw a young emperor who seemed hesitant and was constantly consulting his mother. Whispers began to circulate through the camps. They didn't see a victorious general, they saw a mama's boy who was unfit to lead them. The army's loyalty, the very foundation of an emperor's power, was beginning to crumble. Returning from the east with their reputation tarnished, Alexander and Mamaea immediately had to face a new crisis. This time, it was on the northern frontier, along the Rhine and Danube rivers. Germanic tribes were crossing the border, raiding Roman territory. So, in 234 AD, the imperial court packed up and moved to the main Roman military base in Moguntiacum, modern-day Mainz, Germany. This is where everything would unravel. The Roman legions stationed on the Rhine were tough, hardened veterans. They had spent their lives fighting the fierce Germanic warriors. They were expecting a warrior emperor to lead them into a glorious, decisive battle. Instead, they got Severus Alexander and his mother. And what was Mamaea's brilliant strategy for dealing with the Germanic tribes? Not war, but diplomacy. And by diplomacy I mean bribery. She convinced her son that it would be cheaper and less risky to simply pay the Germanic chieftains to go away. To the soldiers, this was the ultimate insult. It was an act of cowardice. They were there to fight for the honor of Rome, to protect the empire, and their leaders wanted to buy off the enemy. Even worse, where was this money coming from? It was being taken from the soldiers' own pay and bonuses. They were being asked to fund a policy they saw as shameful and weak. The resentment that had been simmering for years boiled over into open rage. The soldiers felt utterly betrayed. They started looking for a new leader, someone who was one of them. Their eyes fell on a man named Maximinus Thrax. He was the complete opposite of Severus Alexander. He was a giant of a man, a career soldier from a humble background in Thrace, who had risen through the ranks on pure merit and battlefield brutality. He was tough, decisive, and he embodied everything the soldiers felt an emperor should be. He was a true soldier's soldier. Secretly, the legions began to plot. In March of 235 AD, the mutiny began. The Legio XXIII Primigenia, one of the legions that Maximinus commanded, proclaimed him emperor. The rebellion spread like wildfire through the camp. Severus Alexander and his mother were in their tent just outside the main fortress. When they heard the news, they panicked. Alexander, now 26 years old, finally realized the depth of the hatred against him and, more specifically, against his mother. Reports say he broke down, weeping and blaming his mother for their ruin. But it was far too late. A centurion and a group of soldiers, their swords drawn, burst into the imperial tent. There was no trial, no negotiation. They found the Emperor of Rome clinging to his mother. The soldiers didn't hesitate. They cut them both down. The reign that began with a mother's ambition ended with her and her son dying together in a bloody tent on the cold German frontier. The assassination of Severus Alexander wasn't just the end of one emperor. It was the end of an era. It marked the violent end of the Severan dynasty and threw the Roman Empire into a period of unprecedented chaos known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century. For the next 50 years, the empire would be torn apart by civil war, foreign invasions, economic collapse, and plague. More than 20 men would claim the title of emperor in that short time, most of them dying violent deaths. The stability that Alexander's reign, for all its faults, had provided was shattered. Maximinus Thrax, the man who replaced him, would rule through fear and force, setting a new, brutal precedent for how to hold power. The story of Severus Alexander is a tragedy. A story of a well-intentioned young man who was never given the chance to become his own person or his own ruler. His fatal flaw wasn't cruelty or incompetence, but weakness and his inability to escape the suffocating control of his mother. It's a powerful lesson from history about how leadership requires not just good intentions, but also strength, independence, and the respect of those you lead. His death was the trigger, the single event that sent the mighty Roman Empire spiraling into its darkest hour. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this dive into Roman history fascinating, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more stories about the incredible and often shocking world of the past. Let me know in the comments which emperor you'd like to see covered next. See you in the next video.